But if folks want to take their seats, we can get started in just a minute. All right, should we get started? Great. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Brian Hauk, and welcome to Imagining Affordable Housing. This is an outgrowth of the Blue Sky process that has been going on. As you recall, at our discussion in June, we shared a lot of ideas about what could happen with Pilgrim Hall. And as part of that discussion, an outgrowth of that was, should we explore some potential for using some of this space for affordable housing, both as a way to help finance what we have to do with Pilgrim Hall, but also as a way to help alleviate some of the things that our community is dealing with in one way. And so this discussion today is part of that process. Our friends at Satellite Affordable Housing Associates are here to help us. And what we are doing today is really just imagining for a few minutes, taking some of these ideas, what does it mean to have affordable housing, and trying to get them a little bit more concrete. Before we turn it over to them, though, I want to make clear what we're not doing today, because we are not voting on anything, we are not deciding anything, we are not critiquing and getting, picking any one path to go down today. What our friends are going to do for us is we've asked them, give us your first ideas. Look at what we've got to offer. Give us some first ideas about what affordable housing could mean here. And they're going to share those first ideas. They may or may not be involved in the process going forward, but we're grateful to have them here today. And as you look at their first ideas, it would be, we're opinionated, we get it. We'll have reactions to them, and if you want to share those different reactions, that'll be wonderful. But also ask them questions about, you guys are showing us ideas that are this many floors instead of that many floors. Why? You guys are, how do you guys look at Durant House? What do you see when you look at that? When you, what kind of family, why are you talking about senior housing or family housing? Because when we hear how they're thinking about it and what kind of projects would have to be meaningful and financially viable to them, that'll help us understand what the potentials are here. So we'll have them present for a little while, we'll take some questions, and then we'll wrap up and move on to future discussions about it informed by their ideas of how to make this more concrete. So Susan and Eve, thank you.
Hi. You guys don't mind if I walk around? Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us here to talk about affordable housing. My name is Susan Friedland. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit Berkeley-based organization called Satellite Affordable Housing Associates. We have been around for almost 50 years, and our work is to build affordable housing and serve low-income families, seniors, people with special needs. I have a personal connection to this work. I've been doing this work for 25 years. First started when I met Amy Easted. We were together up here at Cal in graduate school in city planning. And it's work I feel really passionately about, and I'm honored to be here just to talk to you a little minute in general about what is affordable housing, and then more specifically, what opportunities might there be here. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So what is this thing we call affordable housing? what does it mean? What do you think? Any ideas? It doesn't exist in Berkeley. How much does it cost to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Berkeley? $2,300. What'd you say? A 2-bedroom in Berkeley, what does it cost? $3,000. So does that sound like affordable housing? No. Well, what the market produces is what will make the most money for the landlord, right? What the market will bear. But what is affordable housing? So, I heard a baby have an idea. So what affordable housing is it's housing that's built specifically to house people who earn less than half of what the area median income is. So that sounds pretty abstract. What do you guys think is the average income for a 2-person household, the median income for a 2-person household in Alameda County? Wow, I've heard a range from $53,000 to $110,000. So the median income from a family of 2 is just, I'm going to keep the numbers round so that the math makes sense because it's Sunday and I think math is kind of hard for me on a Sunday. But about $70,000 is the median income for a family of 2 in Alameda County. So families earning half the area median income earn, there you go, $35,000. So for the purposes of math, let's say 36, because it'll make the calculation easier. Okay, so if you're earning $36,000, what are some jobs of people earning $36,000? People you know, retail workers, home health aides, daycare workers, restaurant workers, mechanics. So those are some of the types of jobs. $36,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but while rents have gone crazy, incomes have really stagnated. So those, daycare workers are not making a lot more now than they did 10 years ago when rents were cheaper. Okay, so let's think about that $36,000 a year 2-person household. So we just said the rents around here would be about $3,000 a month. Wait a minute, $3,000 a month is $36,000 a year. That's their whole paycheck going to rent, right? So what would make it affordable? Next slide, please. So the definition is affordable is that the household wouldn't be paying more than 1/3 of their income for rent. So you think about it, a $36,000 a year household makes $3,000 a month. So 1/3 of that is $1,000. So that would be what we call an affordable rent. So where can you find a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,000 in Berkeley? I think the answer was nowhere. So this is where the need is. The need for affordable housing is to house the folks making half or less of the area median income to a rent that they can afford. So that's what affordable housing is. Who lives in affordable housing? Next slide, please. So many different kinds of people live in affordable housing. People who work in nonprofits may live in affordable housing. People who are seniors on fixed income may live in affordable housing. Low-wage workers may live in affordable housing. People with disabilities, people on Social Security, that's who lives in affordable housing. It is the diversity of the Bay Area reflects who lives in affordable housing. And I'd like to tell a little story by video. It's a short video. You can find the whole video on our website, but I think it just illustrates a little bit about who lives in affordable housing and what it can be. Because affordable housing comes when there's a need and when there's an opportunity. And the need could not be greater than it is right now in the Bay Area. And the opportunity is what groups like yours have in terms of land or parking lot or some other space. So there needs to be a need and an opportunity. And that's why we're here with you today to talk about the need, to talk about the opportunity. We're going to show a really short little video that gives a little insight into who lives in affordable housing. And then I'll turn it over to Eve to talk a little bit more about the site. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh, no. I think we'll have to skip Charlotte's story. I have to say, PowerPoints never work when you need them to. Well, I think we can tell us Charlotte's story. Well, I'll tell you a little story about Strawberry Creek Lodge, where Charlotte lives, and maybe someone in this room knows someone who lives at Strawberry Creek Lodge. You do.
My mother lived there for the second to last place that she lived in her life for about 5 years, and she loved it there. Very small pension, very small Social Security.
I think that kind of tells it all. Does anyone know anyone who lives at Strawberry Creek Lodge? You do? Yeah? Do you want to say anything? Or just so they're happy. So Strawberry Creek Lodge is a big, really cool-looking building built in the 60s along Strawberry Creek before it's on Addison and near Bonar. It's got its own little entrance, and it's on the creek, and it's just a beautiful building that was built in the 60s by some visionary social justice folks who got together and said there needs to be affordable housing, and they formed a nonprofit, and they got a grant from the federal government to build 150 homes for low-income seniors. And a couple of years ago, it needed some renovation, and it needed some new ownership, and so we partnered with them and renovated the building, and it's really beautiful community. So that's what Charlotte would have talked about, how affordable housing, moving somewhere affordable really changed her life. I mean, for many seniors who were paying almost their whole Social Security check without anything left over to eat, and under the stress and worry of paying the rent and potentially losing your housing, moving into stable housing with a low rent and other wonderful people to form a community made a big difference in her life. So that's what we would have talked about with Charlotte. But I know we don't have a ton of time, and I really want to be able to talk and answer questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Eve to talk about the site.
I'll get over my disappointment in our technical failure in a second. Scott, do you mind doing the slides? So as we talked about at the beginning, I'm Eve Stewart. I'm the real estate director at SAHA. And we were asked to look at the site and do what we call a test fit analysis, just to see what opportunity there might be there. And in doing this, we considered the constraints of zoning and the size of the site, and also Durant House. And there may be other constraints that as a community you discuss and come forward, but at this point in time we didn't consider anything beyond those three main things. So next slide, please. So this is the site, very familiar to you all, but just in case people want to get oriented, we have Durant Avenue would be the main access to the development, and so it would front onto Durant. Next slide. And of course, Durant House is right in the middle. So in approaching this, we are kind of programmatic parameters where we wanted to get about 40 homes in the development, and that's important because it helps us, it helps with feasibility, raising the funding to build it, and then also operating it. We want to make sure that we have community spaces for the residents. We want to have a on-site property management office as well as services coordination, and we also want to have open space. So those are essentially the Legos that we're moving around on the site to see how they fit. Next slide. So the first exercise that we did was this test fit A, and you'll see in this scenario the building fronts on Durant Avenue, which is at the top, and then we've moved Durant House over to the back corner. And the parking, we can include some parking, but in this case, it would have to come through the existing parking lot. So there would be an easement down, through here. It's a little, I don't have a pointer, but yeah. So cars would have to access up from the back, and then the whole building could lay out along Durant. Okay, where's the sanctuary? It's over here to the right. Yeah. And the pink colors are the homes, and then the yellow, the kind of orangey color, are offices and community space, and then the yellow just shows corridors. Again, we're just sort of moving shapes around on the site to see where they would fit. So that was one idea of how the building could lay out, and we were looking at 3 stories. So in all of these exercises, the building is fitting into 3 stories, and we're getting about 42 homes on the site. Is there a question? Yes, that's Durant House. So we looked at moving it around. We started with the premise that there would be a lot of interest in retaining Durant House as a structure and on the site. So we considered that one of the initial constraints and just looked at where we could put it on the site. Any other questions just about understanding this? Yes. Right, so the question was, can you drive all the way through to Durant, or do you have to come in and out through the parking lot? So in this scenario, you would have to come in and out through the parking. It doesn't have direct access onto Durant. Yeah.
Is that the entire lot, so the property, and so that aside from the sanctuary, that's all the parking there would be?
No, we would still have parking all down here. This is only the northwest quadrant of our entire campus.
Okay, I'd really like to see it in the whole unit of space, because this is very hard to understand.
Got it. Yes.
What is the brown space in the lower right corner here?
Oh, the brown space, that's sort of the back of house. So trash room, meter room, so forth. Yeah, so just planning for that. Maybe, Scott, maybe we should go back to the area plan or the area map and just look at that again. So in all the scenarios, we're looking at this space up here as a potential location for housing. So not this tail, and then the church is over here.
So where does Durant House fit in?
Well, Durant House at the moment is up here. And so in the exercises that we did, we thought about, well, where could Durant House move around the site so that it can be retained, but it allows for some new uses to also go there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the first option, we moved it down into this corner here. Yeah, sure. Yes.
I wanted to ask a clarifying question as far as numbers. So we use terms like median income and the 30% rule. So when it comes to the applicants and determining the amount of rent that they pay under the 30% rule, are these median income numbers pre-tax, or do they allow for taking off the federal and state income tax and FICA and other things that come out before you have your quote disposable income to pay for your rent?
That is a great question. I wonder if we should hold it. Yeah, maybe we could answer that in more detail sort of after we go through the design options. That's a really good question. Yes.
Will some of the units be available for Section 8?
Another great question. We do accept Section 8 at our properties. Oh, yeah, that's true.
So that design goes all the way up to East Bay School for Boys?
Yes, and actually, let's go back to the option A because we have three. There were 3 scenarios that we looked at. So let's go back to option A. So option A does go pretty close to the property line. with the school, the church. And unless anyone has any kind of orientation design questions about A, we will move on to B. Yes.
When you say that, there's a green space, a playground area next to the ranch house. Is the space where? Is the space next to the East Bay School for Boys between there and Durant House taken away by this plan?
We did not look at that as part of the kind of basic constraints. Again, we only looked at the zoning and Durant House, so that's a consideration that would have to be evaluated in a future exercise. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah, we didn't kind of notch that out of the site as part of this exercise. So let's go to the next kind of layout as another idea. In some ways, it's very similar. Durant House is still down in the corner. Here, though, we've included a driveway off Durant House so that access would be completely from Durant down along the side of the property.
So to get to 40 units, you'd have to be 5 stories?
No, all of these are 3-story scenarios. And this is just the first floor that we're showing, so that's right.
Point out that there is open space on these plans.
Oh, and there is quite a bit of open space in all of these scenarios. So you can see anything that's not covered by the squares would be open space.
I'm having trouble with the math. Are the upper units smaller than the ones you're showing here? Because I don't see how you're going to get to 40 in 3 stories, even if all that other space is filled in with apartments.
Well, we don't right, we do those, and I can double check if we went to 4 stories in some cases. I'm pretty sure we kept it. Yes.
The units throughout the structure are all the same size.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. We
These
did
are-
go to 4 stories in all of these. Yeah. So it would be slightly over the 35-foot height limit in this location. We would need to go a few feet higher to get the 4 stories. Yeah, my apologies.
Eve, we have a question back here. So,
Yes, yes.
let's try and use the mic because there's people who aren't here today that might want to watch it later, and we are recording the program. If I can pass it around, that'd be great.
Thank you. I have a question about parking. Right now, the church parking lot is oftentimes very full. If I understand what you're doing, you're going to cut down on parking and increase numbers who want it because they're living there. So how would you house the current membership of the church and the residents in a smaller parking lot?
Right, I think that's a great question. And again, we didn't take into consideration the parking priority or what the church is interested in terms of preserving parking. So we were just looking at what would fit on this area of the site.
We know, because we've heard from folks, that parking is a concern, and I think that's a conversation we need to have internally about how we would handle that, a long-term parking plan and strategy for the next 100 years. And we can have a separate conversation about that. Sure.
Could I just jump in to ask clarification? Where are the entrances and exits of this model of parking lot?
I agree we need to talk about parking, but if somebody is coming up with plans, I think they need to understand what our approach is and what our needs are. I don't think you can do them separately.
And then just to answer the question about the driveway entrance, in this exercise B, it would be on Durant over here.
So it's the same entrance and exit again?
Correct. Right.
Eve, if I understand the plans correctly, there were 3 preliminary test fit scenarios. One with more parking, I think 13 spaces, one with 6 or 7 spaces here, and maybe one with 2 spaces. They're all using the same entrance off of Channing.
No, actually, in this one, the entrance and exit is off of Durant.
Okay.
And so it would be kind of contained. And then same in the third, which we haven't seen yet.
So for clarity, the driveway continues along the right side of the building?
Yes.
Between the church and the new structure?
That's correct.
So I just wanted to address the gentleman's concern about parking. So we're not coming here to pitch or sell or propose a project. We were just asked if this was available, what could you develop on there? So we're not trying to say, do this, do that, or we're not pitching anything. We just were responding to what we were asked. So certainly issues about ownership and parking, there's a million questions, but it's not sort of what we came prepared to answer, because that's really for your group to figure out what you want. We just are doing a simple exercise of, if we were given this site, what could we potentially build there? So I just wanted to reassure you, we're not trying to say, do this, do that, so.
And to confirm that, so you're working within this area of the lot, and so this is what the needs of the affordable housing development would have. So the parking, to clarify, would be, this is the parking that's identified for the units on this site. So it was more of a comment.
Practical question about the apartments themselves. How many bedrooms in these apartments?
Well, in this scenario, we were thinking about a senior housing scenario, so that these would be 1-bedroom apartments. That's correct. Except for the manager unit would be a 2-bedroom.
More practical question: how many square feet are these apartments?
I think we assume they would be about 600 square feet each. So typically, a 1-bedroom would be between 550 and 600.
Eve, are some of these details included in the program? Should we let you continue, or should we? There are a half dozen hands continually popping up. Yeah. I think we're going to get bogged down in questions, or maybe we can go with an overview and ask questions at the end.
Sure. Yeah, we can go, because there's one other potential scenario to consider that we looked at. Option C. And so this building starts to look a little bit different. It's L-shaped. Durant House would stay more in its current location, but shift a little bit over closer to the church. And again, the driveway access would be from Durant House along the side, and then open space in between the Durant House and then the residential portion. I think that basically are the 3 ways we kind of moved the pieces around in the site to show that there is an opportunity to create housing here. There's a lot of different ways to lay it out, and I think we've had a lot. We can continue the discussion about questions generally about affordable housing, and also about specifics to what might be possible here.
Are we going to continue through the program, or just go straight to questions? I thought there was an economic component of it.
Yeah, there's not that we had discussed prior, so
okay.
That really concludes our comments.
Okay.
Oh, so I wanted to ask, kind of one of the constraints you were operating under was current zoning. And I wonder if you could give us a little bit more information about if we wanted to be more ambitious and think about how to interplay with city zoning and maybe get some relax or do something, how that could change these options and maybe open up other options. And specifically, I'm thinking about building higher. Would that be a possibility? What would that include for us?
Sure. The zoning here, I mentioned this, it is a 35-foot height limit, but we would have the opportunity to request some concessions. So we could request to go higher. It's likely that the city would be open to that. And again, it would really depend on the conversation that we're having with this community and other neighbors about what felt appropriate here. The site, interestingly, is in a no parking overlay district, so there actually won't be a city requirement to provide parking for the new development. But at the same time, we would continue to evaluate what the parking need might be.
I'm going to walk the mic around.
Thank you. Mostly that you'd answered my question, which was the parking, that it's not required by the city of Berkeley for a development like this. Is it realistic to assume that low-income people will not have cars and not put a burden on the area and the parking, the limited parking that we have left over after this?
Well, and Susan may have some comments here too, but we do find that, especially in our senior housing, there is very low rate of car ownership and car usage. It's very expensive to have a car, and it does, people get to a point where they aren't driving as much, and it's just easier not to have a car. We will have some staff at the site, so it probably makes sense to include, at least a couple of spaces for staff. But we do see that a lot of times if we have a lot of parking at a senior building, it goes unused.
There is so much to learn about affordable housing that I will be grateful for any enlightenment you can offer in thinking through these various elements. I appreciate it very much. But my basic question is, where are the children in relation to affordable housing? Insofar as you talked about medium income for two people, and that's where the formula comes from. But also, are there no children among persons who qualify for affordable housing?
Well, thanks so much for being open to what, and bringing questions to us. Yes, there are lots of children in affordable housing. I use the two-person household income just for illustrative purposes because the math was simple with 70,000 and 36,000. But our family housing, the average household size is much more like 3 or 4. Our low-income households have children, or sometimes they don't, but there's plenty of children in our affordable housing. We currently have, in our 60 buildings, I think we have about 600 kids in our affordable housing. If it's a senior building, the primary resident would be a senior. There's certain rules and regulations, depending on the funding source, as to whether the age in the household, whether there can be children or not, but we definitely have some children in our senior housing who are being raised by their grandparents. But generally, predominantly senior buildings are adults, but our family housing has plenty of children. So it was a good question, because I can see how from my example it looked like we don't house kids.
Is this...
Well, so the question was, how does the financing, how is that connected to the number of bedrooms and the household size? And if you build buildings with just studios or ones, are you going to generate less rent to be able to, and it'll be harder to pay for building it and operating it? Is that kind of what you were saying? So we'll have to do a follow-up session on how do you finance affordable housing, because that'll take at least an hour to talk about. But in general, the way we structure our projects is that we need to make the projects financially feasible and charge kind of the lowest rent possible to still run and operate the buildings well. So when we talked about that $1,000 that was affordable to a household making $36,000 a year, and just to your question, that is before taxes. So it's all based on a federal formula before taxes. That was a good question. So we need to be able to run a building on the $1,000 a month that we're collecting, right? Times 40, the $40,000 a month that we're collecting. So we have to pay utilities and staff and all those things. And at the end, The toggle factor is how much do we have to pay in mortgage, right? So buildings where we have to put a mortgage on are going to be, it's trickier, the economics is trickier. And whether we pay a mortgage or not depends on how much capital we can bring into a project. So it's quite a complicated question. So I think we'd need a bit of a follow-up to talk through the economics of how do you actually build this. That'll be part 2 if you, what? Yes.
So just to be clear, and if this project is moving forward and we're looking at financing, that's 100% SAHA's responsibility. So that's what we do is we go out and find the funding to build. And then we've also talked about that the church would retain land ownership. So that was a really early question, would that be feasible? So the idea would be a long-term ground lease. So the church could retain the land ownership and that we'd work to monetize the value of that lease so that proceeds could come back to the church for other uses that you're looking at.
Is this meant to be independent living? And is there 24-hour, somebody there 24 hours? And are they nurses or
Right. So this is independent living, not assisted. So it's for folks that are really able to live independently. They have a lease, they get their apartment for the lease, and then we provide on-site social services, but not medical services. And it's not 24 hours and no meals. Yeah, no meals. So it's independent living. There's lots of nice community activities that'll go on and support for individual tenants, but not medical and no meals. No, we would have a site member living at the building, but only for emergencies. So the program is really between 9 and 5 usually.
I am certainly aware of the need for affordable housing, and I'm all for supporting that, but I have great concern regarding the impact on the sanctuary on Sunday morning. I believe the sanctuary should be a sanctuary, and that's not intended as a pun. So my question is, what has the results been with St. Mark's and other people who have done something similar next to the sanctuary?
Well, our organization started off almost 50 years ago as a religious affiliate to be building affordable housing near churches. So sort of the whole history of our organization, we're no longer religiously affiliated, but that's how our organization started. And there's actually a really long history of sort of the connection between churches and affordable housing and social justice where churches have used surplus land or parking lots to build affordable housing. So I'm not here to convince you to do anything, but there's definitely great examples of affordable housing co-locating with churches and it working.
Would it be fair to say that SAHA looked at our site and said, seems like probably senior housing would probably be the best? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the site is small and there's a certain economy of scale. It's very impractical, for example, for us to try to build a 20-unit apartment building. The scale of it, the number of units, it's pretty small for us to make work. But smaller units, sort of, you saw the connection, the smaller units we can fit more. So for a project to be feasible, it really needs to be closer to 35, 40 units. And the way to do that would be to build smaller units, and that would probably be more appropriate for seniors.
My question is about parking per unit. I've worked with seniors for a long time, and many of them have caregivers that come every day. There needs to be parking allowed for the caregivers.
That's a good point. Yeah, it actually depends on the financing. The question was, who is a senior anyway? So depending on where we secure the financing from, some financing defines senior as 55 and up, and some as 62 and up. So at this point in time, really early in a process of evaluation, we couldn't say for certain which of those two it would be.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and I'm a strategic planner by background, so I really appreciate what you're trying to do. We have only provided a few of our parameters, and you're working with those few to see what could be done, all of this will be iterated through 5, 6, 7 times for all sorts of issues. I just want to thank you for the fact that you've taken the time to pursue what might happen here. And what I'm hearing you say is small site, 40 units maybe, community room and on-site management office, playground as part of the parcel, 4 stories. Maybe that's higher than zoning, but that's probably doable. And there are lots of other financing issues.
That's really a great summary. I can tell you're a strategic planner by profession. I think the one other thing I would add is unbelievable location. I mean, what you have here is a jewel of a location because it's so close to so many amazing, wonderful things that whoever lived here would benefit from. And so to be able to provide housing in such a rich community and with such a rich community of people, yourselves, is pretty special. So I do want to add that in addition to just the square feet, there's a whole neighborhood and community that would make this a really wonderful opportunity.
Hi, Susan. I'm
Hi.
Joe. I don't know if you had any chance to think more broadly about the whole parcel we have, but I guess my question is, in your opinion, for our neighborhood and this opportunity, is this the right size parcel? Or if we were slightly bigger in what we were saying, do some test fits too, would that be, like, just, is this the right kind of set of initial parameters? And just your thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as was already stated, there's so many moving parts. It's a very iterative process when you're trying to figure out, a new development. So some of the things that would have to be further looked at, would be, for example, parking or open space, and then what does that mean to the rest of the site? And so to accommodate more open space or more parking, do we have to go another story? So that's kind of the loop that we would continue to iterate on, and kind of see where we land and see where the priorities emerged.
Well, I guess just to follow up to that, like, is this roughly the right idea? Like, I'm thinking more like if we were to go bigger, like if you were to take more of the parcel, then do you have an opportunity to do completely different things around, like how you do parking, right? Do the finances change significantly? And if so, is a larger project something that is the size you guys would take on as well, or is there a size that's too large for you? Or, I mean, I'm certainly not saying we completely, but I just want to know, is this like?
Right. Well, most of our properties are under 100 units, so that's kind of the I wouldn't say it's the maximum, but mostly when we're looking at new sites, we're looking at something under 100 units. So that would be a very dense project for a site of this size. So we could certainly look at doing a larger development. Our main thing was that going below about 40 units throws feasibility into question. It would be very hard to do something smaller than that.
Thanks very much for your presentation. There's a lot of thought going into it. I think that in a broader sense, the housing problem in the Bay Area is affordability and availability. And they're two different issues. And what you've done is you started out talking about affordability for a $70,000, $35,000 person. But I don't think they necessarily have to be joined together. Your presentation is a way to make affordable housing and address the availability of that for people, but I don't think we necessarily need to think of those as joined at the hip. I think you could probably address affordable housing. Affordability to me is really monetary. What you started out was they can't afford the rent. Well, we as a church, if we think that is something that we want to address, which apparently we do, could do that from a financial standpoint without the availability issue. And I think we need to think broader. You've done a great job of putting those two pieces together.
So I do think they're linked. It is what we do is link affordability and production. But I think that maybe I wanted to just highlight the fact that even people who can afford to pay market rent, they're poor, but they have a Section 8 voucher, for example. They've got the money. They're ready to go out there. There's nowhere for them to rent. So it is both a supply and an affordability project. Right now, for example, like the Berkeley Housing Authority, Oakland Housing Authority, they have resources to give families in the form of these Section 8 vouchers, and they can't find units at even kind of market rate because things are above market rate. So I think it sounds like a really interesting conversation for your community to have, but I do think they're linked. But I understand your comment.
I guess how do you make a buck? You've got so.
How do we make a buck?
Yeah.
Did you say?
Affordable housing compared to a regular apartment, it would seem to me you would make tiny little apartments that you cram a whole bunch of people into the building. You cut corners on construction. This whole ball of wax. Isn't there a fine line between slumlord kind of apartments that this would be easy to tip over into that?
So I think that's a really good question. There are certainly lots of slumlords out there, people who do run buildings subpar and cram people in, but we have a completely different model than that. We use government funding so that we build the housing, both so that it's high quality and also that it doesn't need to take on a big mortgage, so we're not paying huge debt, so we can keep the rents lower. I think that might be an affordable housing 201 after this, where we talk about how the heck do we build this? How do we as an organization stay in business? How do our buildings run in the black? I think that would be like a sort of separate follow-up, if that's okay. It's a big question to have to talk about. Yeah, it's possible. Exactly. I mean, I think it's a good example to go, for example, to Strawberry Creek Lodge, or go on our website and take a look at the buildings that we've built. One you might, actually, I'm going to welcome everyone here today. We're having a grand opening of a building called Harper Crossing, which is, if you're ever at Ashby Bart, you may have seen a building going up under construction over the last year, right across from the parking lot on the west side of the street. That is home to 45 low-income seniors. We just finished construction a couple of months ago, and we're having a welcoming grand opening on Tuesday in the morning from 10 to 12, and you're all welcome to come. I think it's great to see, well, what is affordable housing? Is it crummy, slumlordy housing, or is it beautifully built housing where people can live with dignity and pride? And I definitely would say the latter. I've been doing this for 25 years, and the reputation of myself and our organization is really primary. And we talk all the time about our responsibility as stewards of public assets, because we raise all this money from different public agencies to build housing that's going to treat our residents with dignity. And that's what we've been doing, our organization, for 50 years. So,
while I'm walking the mic to somebody that has not yet asked a question, Susan, maybe you can comment briefly. How long does SAHA stay involved in these projects? How long do these projects last?
Do you want to talk about SAHA's role in the projects? Or I can. So, right. So, like I mentioned when I talked about long-term stewards of assets, we have regulatory requirements that go along with this government funding that we use to build that stays in place for 55 years. So for 55 years, we're on the hook that we're providing quality housing to low-income people whose income we verify, and that we're not just like picking and choosing whoever we want to live there, but that it's fair and people go through a lottery. And every year we're audited, and every year we have to comply with all these regulations. 55 years is generally what the funding sources require. So I don't know, does that kind of help answer those questions? Okay, wow, we've got a lot of questions.
Sort of a two-part question. A, B, and C all have Durant House somewhere, and D would move Durant House off the site and allow you more area to build within, and possibly the parking issue could be subterranean. Dig down, have a lower floor for parking to both help the church and that, but have ground level up be the construction. Is that feasible?
I mean, I think what to do with Durant House and what to do with parking are kind of the single biggest drivers in laying out scenarios. So I would say that definitely would need to be the kind of next set of topics.
That was actually my question.
Oh, that was your question. Oh, good.
My question is about whether we can mix the housing, because I understand you do 55 and older, but can we mix it with another floor where we could house some younger people?
You know, we theoretically really like mixed population buildings. It's tricky with the financing, so it would really depend. You know, I know it sounds very abstract. It all depends on the financing, but it does. The different pieces of financing come along with different requirements. It's generally pretty tricky to mix populations. It's possible under certain scenarios, but it's a difficult thing to promise up front because it's pretty tricky. Sounds like a great idea, but it is tricky. Yeah.
So I have a two-part question. One has to do with, you said something about not providing meals. But I'm unclear whether these apartments have kitchens in them or not.
They do. They're full bathrooms, kitchens, full independent living.
Okay, and then related to that is these are not spaces for like a couple. So when you're talking about
we have a lot of couples who live in, it depends
in 600 square feet?
Yeah, you can't. It's just a small apartment.
Okay, tripping over each other.
5 minutes. We only have 5 minutes.
Okay, is this the most you can get out of the space without getting rid of Durant House? I mean, are you sort of up against what the best you can do without getting rid of Durant House? Is that?
Seems, I mean, yes.
Okay.
This is, at this level, this is the best, this is about the right, this is the size that would fit given current zoning, given the Durant House, and having some parking.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have 4 minutes left.
Okay. Oh, wait, way in the back hasn't spoken.
I'll come back, Constance. So I understand that it sounds like the 4 stories, which is just 5 feet more, feels possible. Is it possible to do another story? Is that just that much harder?
It's possible. It just would be, it's not a given. We'd have to, it'd be tricky.
From a zoning point of view?
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of support for affordable housing in the density. Yeah.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for coming. So I've been thinking about this since the church talked about it, and some of my concerns are, what about the trash? What about the upkeep of the exterior? What about the tagging? So are you going to be responsible for that, or the church?
Well, generally, our model is that we own and operate the property. So we have a staff of 180, and 120 of them are managers and maintenance. So we have our own janitorial, our own management staff. And let me tell you, dealing with trash is like a huge topic of conversation in our organization. Whenever we plan a new development, we have our maintenance staff in the room figuring out how are we going to deal with the trash, like from the very earliest designs. Eve and I are both laughing because trash is like always huge. But yes, we, in every cases of our buildings, we are the both owner and manager of the physical building itself.
Okay,
So.
and then one more question.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the units can occupy 2 people. So what is your control with multiple people moving in because they need shelter? Say, for example, myself and my partner, we move in, and then we see a friend that's on the street or 2 friends, and they move in with us. How do you control that?
Well, we have house rules and a lease that we enforce. And it's always, we we hate to evict people, but sometimes we have to evict people because they don't follow the lease or the house rules. They're not being respectful of their community. They're letting their friends in the middle of the night, so they would get a warning notice, and then if they didn't comply, it could be grounds for eviction. So we really do have to enforce the rules very consistently and very clearly so that we can maintain the peaceful enjoyment of everybody in the building. Does that? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Greg.
Hi, Greg.
I thank you for coming. I appreciate this. My question has to do with, we're looking at how this church sustains itself into the future, and we need to think about how much we can generate from the asset that we have available here. And we haven't spoken at all today about comparing market rate type apartments to what is being proposed. I understand from Scott and a few people I've talked to that there can be ways to make this sort of economically equivalent. But I'd like to know, are you confident that we can do that, and will it take more effort and time for us to get to that point with low-income housing?
I would say that doing the kind of analysis of doing market rate versus affordable is going to be really important for the group to look at. And we're working with a church right now in North Berkeley that did that and just did that same analysis, and they made a decision as a congregation to go with an affordable project. But it is definitely something you'd have to evaluate.
But there is no assumption here that we will suffer economically by doing this.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I think the fundamental assumption actually is that the church would receive a financial benefit from building affordable housing on the property, whether as a one-time
Right.
sale price or whether as a monthly lease payment, because the church would retain ownership of the site itself.
No, I understand that. I just meant a diminishment of our return if we went with low-income housing. That's not the assumption. Is that correct? I mean, we're
That's
assuming...
not the assumption that you would be just giving us the site and
No, I
walking
don't
away
mean
from
that.
it.
I mean worse than market rate. The difference between market rate and low-income housing for the church would not be a significant difference in return of
Yeah, I mean,
investment.
you'd have to do that evaluation to be absolutely sure for yourself.
Yeah.
But the value of the site would be based on a market appraisal.
Uh-huh.
So it should be similar.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Can we go to Jim over here, who's had a hand up for a while, and then close out with Amy?
Hi, Jim.
Hi, thank you. This is going to be permanent, and my concern is green space. Green space for our kids. And maybe it was within the parameters that you were asked to look at, but I'm very concerned that the playground is gone. I don't consider that a good trade to lose that and have open space that is specifically for the residents of this building. This is a permanent decision. And my second concern, and I know we're going to talk about this, is with regard to parking, is the use of our area here by the community. The usability of it is greatly impacted already by the parking we have available. I personally have been affected by coming in at different times in the week other than Sunday morning, whether it's Sunday afternoon or during an evening, and not finding parking, as limited as it is, not finding it on the street, and turning around and going back home. So what I've seen are some major permanent changes of reduction of parking so far and of green space for our kids. I would like to know how many churches there are that don't retain green space for their kids. And I don't think that this counts out in the front. I think we need a nice enclosed space for our kids. And I think it says something when we give that up.
I'm Amy. Hi. I know you both. And I think you all know me in the congregation. I spoke in June, and so I do come from, just full disclosure, I work in affordable housing, but I'm also called to it. I'm a member of the congregation, and I feel more called to affordable housing just on what I know as the need in our community. And the fact that we don't need more market rate housing. What is going up with market rate housing, and I think the Methodists are putting it in, is just so expensive. So I think it's kind of a both and on that we need to think about solutions sort of nationally and the federal, where they're cutting back on Section 8 and that kind of money that goes to people that can allow them to be in the market. But we have a supply problem, so that's my little soapbox thing. I think that as a congregation we do, this is just, I want to thank you for being here because you were just given a few assumptions to work with for this. This is just kind of a first shot at it. It's very iterative. I work more on the funder side and I've worked for a long time in government, and these projects take a long time, and there is a lot of scrutiny that happens by funders, and we should be aware of that in a positive sense there will be just going in, and we haven't even talked about green development on a funder side. They're going to make whichever developer, if we get to this point, is doing housing, will have to build green and sustainable. It's good for the environment. It's good for their bottom line. And just what they build is beautiful. And I looked at my calendar. Tuesday morning looks open, so I'm going to stop by that Harper's Crossing. I think it'd be I'd like to encourage others to just go to those open houses because you get to walk around into the development. And I do think, though, as a congregation, we do have to start looking at this, and we will. I know if we move forward, more of a calling of doing this, that the parking is an issue we have to talk about, and we can't keep putting it off. We have to talk about that. We have to talk about Durant House. I think this made it simpler today to talk about Durant House being in there. Where could it move around to? But it is a building that would have, if it's staying, it impacts what can be done. If it goes, it's a different design that would result. So I think we do need to start looking at those questions before we were to make any kind of decision about this. I do want to, but I would endorse personally moving. I'm excited about this opportunity, and I think it's needed. I mean, when we talk about senior housing, that's just one of many populations that has a need for affordable housing. And I know the funder or the developer has to look at what's going to work, but as a community, we may want to be thinking about what community, or if there's a floor, or certain units that are serving a different population, what we could do. So I just want to put in a plug for us continuing this conversation, and also looking at the parking and the Durant House, and that's it, I guess. I'm going on and on.
Thanks, Amy. I want to talk a little bit about next steps, in fact, but first, really want to thank Eve and Susan for coming in. And as they said, we gave them a very basic, here are these lots, what can you see, what does the zoning allow? And we have, actually a lot of the responses have been based on what zoning will allow. We can be narrower, taller, shorter, bigger. A lot of things can be really different, and we knew that both parking and playground would be issues. So what we're proposing as sort of the next steps in this conversation and series of conversations is for us to have some discussions that tackle questions of what is the ideal use for open space? What do we think about playgrounds? Let's talk about parking. Talk about parking and talk about parking, and come to a conclusion about what we want to do about those issues in particular. What else, as you think about this, what questions do you have that we need to go back and think about and then come back and discuss? Yeah. So the question is, where does Pilgrim Hall fit into all this? We've concluded pretty much that housing in Pilgrim Hall doesn't make a huge or a significant affordable housing development doesn't make a lot of sense for Pilgrim. The part of the combination that can occur here is, as an affordable housing development occurs, the possibility that we could receive some payment for the use of this property this property, that property, thank you, boy, I'm turned around, that could help us defray some of the cost of Pilgrim Hall redevelopment. But the two are not, they are currently viewed as separate projects, but somewhat interrelated. You're welcome. Jim? I don't agree. So Jim's. Mm-hmm. And I hear no talk about other ways of funding it other than this. So okay. So to summarize Jim's comment, he's concerned that we are too closely relating the development of affordable housing with the redevelopment of Pilgrim Hall. That's actually not the case. It can be complementary. There is likely a need for us, as we're learning what the final insurance settlement could be. There could be a difference between what we want to build in Pilgrim and what the insurance will pay us, and we'll have to find a way to pay for that. We're still waiting. That's going to be a few more weeks before we have a really strong and confirmed sense from the insurance company what that amount will be. And then we need to enter into a design phase that lets us figure out how much it's going to cost. So we're kind of hanging out, waiting until we know more about what the insurance will pay before we know what we have capacity to rebuild. Being able to develop affordable housing can be complementary in that there can be some payment to us. It could just be a separate payment that's totally unrelated to Pilgrim. Because at the moment we don't have anything to talk about with Pilgrim Hall until we know what the insurance settlement is going to be, and we unfortunately thought we'd have an answer sooner than we do, and we're currently discussing with the insurance company what the situation is. The first estimate was pretty significantly different than what they think it should be, so it's going to be a series of conversations, but it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to go into a big design conversation until we have a better idea of what compensation we can receive.
There is a concert at 1:30, and Amari needs to stay.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Can we pray? Can we just pause and pray? Can we stand and pray? Can we touch someone next to us in an appropriate way and pray? Holy, Holy One, thank you for being in the room all morning. Thank you for not leaving at 11:10 or 11:30, but staying right here while we have this conversation. Thank you for the saints who do the incredible work of building affordable housing so that your children will have a safe place to lay their heads. Thank you for being with us and staying with us through conversations about parking and play yards and sanctuary for us and for all. And stay with us as we keep these conversations going. We pray in the strong name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Amen.